name is Writer Histories. Welcome to my channel.
The story I'm about to tell happened a long time ago, but it still lingers in my mind. I've been in the Navy for several years, which means I'm used to all sorts of environments in this line of work. If you ask me, I don't know any world outside of the military. I got into this environment at the insistence of my father many years ago. When I joined the Navy, I was just a skinny and fearful boy. I suppose that's why my father wanted me to join the Navy anyway. For years, I trained to please my father, and my friends and family visited me regularly until I gradually rose through the ranks and earned more than I initially received. I was fully integrated into the Navy, where I had the opportunity to meet a wide range of people and colleagues who became lifelong friends. Some joined for various reasons, while others shared experiences similar to mine. However, regardless of individual circumstances, we all shared a common goal: to dedicate our best efforts in service to our nation. Many of us were assigned to patrol the streets, as Mexico faces significant security challenges, with thieves and dangerous elements present on public roads. We worked as a team to effectively patrol various areas of the city. Coming from the state of Cancun, located in a region near the beaches, my city is also a prominent tourist destination, one of the most visited in all of Mexico. Due to the high rate of visitation, we were often assigned to patrol Cancun, whether during the day, afternoon, or night. Many of us preferred to patrol during the afternoon or morning for various reasons, such as better lighting at those times or the lower likelihood of encountering dangerous individuals, among other factors. One concern was encountering dangerous creatures. Many colleagues shared their stories about nighttime events, and, to be honest, I never took these narratives seriously. I considered them only exaggerated tales, but I was completely wrong. Everyone avoided taking the night shift, and groups took turns for this responsibility. However, I knew sooner or later it would be my turn to do a nighttime patrol, whether I liked it or not. It was then that one of the superiors called me for a conversation in his office. Initially, I had no idea why I was being summoned because, as far as I remembered, I had not done anything deserving special attention, simply carrying out the tasks assigned by the city. It was then that he asked me to patrol a somewhat isolated area of the city where there were several reports of criminal activities, and it was necessary to reassure the population. I promptly accepted without hesitation. However, before leaving, he emphasized that the patrol had to be done during the night shift. Having already agreed, there was no turning back. Later on, I began the patrol, this time without the company of my colleagues, as many of them had requested time off, and I didn't want to interfere with their days off with work obligations. Additionally, I trusted in my physical ability to restrain any thief or criminal if necessary. And, of course, I was properly armed to protect myself. During the first hour, I only saw a few cars passing through the area, which was covered in dirt and some vegetation. The terrain I was assigned to watch over was filled with foliage and, from what I was informed, used to be part of a farm but had been abandoned for over a decade for unknown reasons. In the truck, I had stored my food, purchased from a convenience store before starting surveillance. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind the vehicle. I suspected they were people, but at that hour, it seemed odd that anyone would be around. Though not impossible, it was highly unlikely. I was about to take a bite of my sandwich when suddenly I felt something heavy leap onto the back of the truck, causing it to sway. I immediately exited the vehicle, still holding on to my sandwich and my weapon. However, upon checking behind the truck, I saw nothing but deep claw marks. I took another bite of the sandwich. This was all quite peculiar, but I was reluctant to entertain any paranormal explanations. I insisted on finding a logical explanation for what had occurred. I was about to return to the truck when suddenly I heard groans coming from that direction. I was convinced I had thoroughly inspected the area to ensure there was nothing there. I approached the source of the groans, and what I saw sent chills down my spine. It was a humanoid figure. I thought I had left it behind the seat, but there they were after having sensed them. I grabbed them and tried to start the car again. At that moment, the creature opened its mouth wide. I started the car and hit the accelerator instantly. The creature let go, and I could only hear its cries as it crawled away on all fours. I couldn't understand what it was saying, but then it let out a scream and began to run. I continued to accelerate as fast as I could until I lost sight of that strange creature. Upon reaching a more populated area of the city, I finally breathed a sigh of relief. My breathing was heavy, and I felt like I could faint at any moment. That was not human, I repeat, it was not human, and to this day, it continues to invade my dreams. I hope everyone is well, dear listeners. I hope you enjoyed the previous story. Now, let's move on to the next narrative. It's possible that, after sharing this, I may decide to take what I saw to the grave, and frankly, I wouldn't mind. This event occurred recently, and to many, I've been labeled as crazy. I am a native of the state of Veracruz, a region full of beaches, ports, and various tourist spots. A few years ago, I inherited the profession of a taxi driver from my father. He taught me everything about the job after retiring due to back problems. Since then, I've accumulated various experiences with the passengers who use my taxi. Many are tourists who request the service to explore the city and reach their desired destinations. Although this job doesn't provide extravagant pay, I can't complain either. In fact, it's a part-time job as I have another source of income that supports me a bit better. However, at the insistence of my father to continue the family legacy, and knowing I couldn't abandon the taxi, I chose to use it as a second source of income to honor our tradition. This story began only a few months ago, roughly between the months of April and May. I'm starting a family with my fiancée, and after the event I'm about to relate, I realized the need to seek opportunities to improve our family's conditions as we grow. I worked hard, hoping to save up to buy a better house instead of continuing to live in our small apartment. Throughout Latin America, there are numerous intriguing legends, from ghosts seeking revenge, lost souls, and places abandoned by God, to UFO sightings, cryptid creatures, nawals, chenks, goblins, and all kinds of beings one can imagine. I remember how my cousins used to scare me with such horror stories. They claimed UFO sightings were real and that these creatures watched us, waiting for the right moment to enslave us. For an 8-year-old child, that was terrifying. Clearly, I didn't want to be enslaved, and the images of aliens I saw only heightened my fear. It was my first traumatic incident in childhood, but getting back to the main point, on that day, I drove a family to a sparsely urbanized area near the city, where events occurred close to roads or farms. Around 6 p.m., I dropped them off at their destination, although I encountered a small traffic jam on the road that delayed our arrival. Nowadays, we rely on GPS apps or maps to inform us about traffic, so I opted for a slightly different route than usual for this journey. Since I had experience with this type of route, having lived in the city for quite some time, I knew various alternative paths for such situations. Thus, I set the route on my phone and continued the journey. In the first 15 minutes, everything proceeded without incident until I turned onto a rough street and my cell phone started glitching, which puzzled me as I had never encountered such an issue before. I suspected that sooner or later, this might happen, considering my phone was somewhat outdated. So, I didn't pay much attention to the erratic behavior of the device. I headed towards a plot of land near a vast field, and after restarting my phone due to the persistent glitches, I noticed something peculiar as the device rebooted. On the horizon, I spotted a moving light, swaying from side to side, instantly capturing my curiosity. I decided to investigate. Abandoning my car, I crossed the fence and advanced towards that mysterious glow. As I approached, I noticed the wind picking up, and the dense vegetation around me made progress difficult. However, armed with the flashlight from my now glitch-free cell phone, I pressed on. The light grew increasingly intense, guiding me to my destination. And then, before my unbelieving eyes, emerged an imposing craft, its obsidian structure adorned with numerous intricate connections. Suspended by 3 supports, the craft pulsed with a bright blue light, echoing the sight that initially caught my attention. However, my bewilderment didn't cease there. 3 humanoid figures, with disproportionately large eyes, pale and slender skin, fixed their gaze on me. Paralyzed by fear, I desperately tried to return to my car, but before I could register the outcome of that unexpected scene, my memory failed, and everything faded into a void of forgetfulness. I simply blacked out. The last thing I remember is something hitting my leg, then a dizzy sensation overtook me, and I collapsed to the ground. I still recall the whispers of the creatures as everything seemed blurred around me, unable to discern their words clearly. I noticed, in a confused glimpse, how they manipulated various tools on my semi-naked body, dressed only in my underwear. Lost and disoriented, I tried to comprehend where I was. The environment was filled with buttons, lights, and an array of technological devices. My consciousness wavered amidst a cold bed, while a mild sedation clouded my senses. The blurry vision prevented me from capturing precise details, but I sensed the presence of several creatures and animals that I couldn't identify, along with another human being. Desperate to escape from this surreal situation, I struggled in vain against the restraints that kept me immobilized. However, my efforts were in vain, as something had been injected into my neck, rendering me powerless amid this strange confusion. As the creatures continued their activities and incomprehensible conversations, I finally succumbed to closing my eyes. When I regained consciousness, I found myself in the middle of the field, half naked and dazed, with the first rays of morning illuminating the horizon. A strong headache pounded my mind, and my body protested with diffuse pains. However, to my surprise, there were no visible scratches on my skin. I checked my phone, noting that it was already 6 in the morning. My clothes were scattered a few meters ahead, so I hastily dressed and searched for the taxi keys. After this strange incident, I decided to share my experience with my family, only to be met with accusations of madness and suggestions of excessive alcohol or lack of sleep the night before. I refused to accept that my mind had invented all of that. The vastness of the universe led me to reject such a narrow view. From that point on, I became an enthusiast of investigating extraterrestrial phenomena as a hobby. Despite this, I have never been able to assert with certainty what really happened that night. While some dismiss my experience as a dream or product of insanity, the lack of concrete evidence leaves me in a state of perpetual uncertainty. Hello, listeners, I hope you enjoyed my previous account. Very well, let's move on to the next story. Recently, I experienced something I would like to share. I am a native of the state of Nuevo Leon, from a lower middle-class family. My father, a true warrior, held various jobs to support me and my siblings after the passing of our mother, who fell victim to heart complications. We grew up learning to make do with what we had, with me being the middle child among 3 siblings. Due to financial limitations, my educational journey was cut short in high school. The dream of attending college and pursuing a specific career was abruptly halted by circumstances. My father, with the help of a friend, got me involved in a business to ensure our livelihood. Recently, a position opened up after a longtime colleague resigned, and I finally managed to get in. I must confess, initially, they doubted my driving skills as I had never operated a truck before. However, with the support of my colleagues and superiors, and with my first truck in hand, I gradually managed to adapt. I started my first deliveries within our state using smaller trucks. Over time, I progressed and expanded my area of operation, which allowed me to improve my financial situation slightly. Currently, I live with my sister, my father who is about to retire, and my grandparents. Although they are kind people, they are incredibly superstitious, which adds a peculiar touch to our living situation. I remember being told to keep a rosary in hand to ward off evil spirits, to say the Our Father prayer before sleeping, and to be cautious about anything related to the occult. I also recall my father working while we were under the care of our grandparents. They would take us to church, whether we wanted to go or not. The elders went resignedly, while we, the younger ones, got bored sitting for so long. The sermons bored us. But my grandparents said we should consider ourselves blessed to not attract evil spirits. Getting back to the point, one day I was called to deliver some packages. They were various products that customers had ordered online, and I would be paid better than for previous deliveries I had made. So, I accepted quite happily and told my father about it. He said it was good news, but I should be very careful on the road. I replied that I would be very careful, as I always am. I packed my things and set the alarm to wake up as early as possible and leave promptly to pick up the truck. The next morning, I bid farewell to my family and went to pick up my truck, which was already loaded with the packages I was supposed to deliver. I started the truck and drove down the street to reach the highway as quickly as possible. I got stuck in traffic for 30 minutes on one of the streets I was supposed to take. I took the opportunity to inform my father that I was on my way to the highway and that it would take me a little longer to get there. Shortly after getting out of the traffic jam, I managed to reach the highway. I put on some music to pass the time and avoid getting bored. Believe it or not, I enjoyed driving along the highway and felt as joyful and refreshed as ever. It was like being on vacation, except I was working and still getting paid. I couldn't believe how good I was feeling. The day was sunny, I was singing my favorite songs, and occasionally chatting on the truck's radio with my fellow truck drivers, who, like me, shared stories from home or their daily lives. One of the best things about being a truck driver is the gossip. As the evening approached, I knew I should look for some lodging for the night. So, I pulled over on the side of the road and took out my phone to search for nearby lodging that had enough space to park the truck with the trailer. Suddenly, I heard the grass rustling and some branches snapping. At this point, it was already night, so the sound caught my attention because from where I was standing, I couldn't see what was causing that noise. I got out of the truck to see what was causing the commotion. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and started shining it towards the foliage on the other side of the barbed wire fence, a classic feature here in Latin America. Well, as I said, I went to see what was causing the noises near the fence. I approached and could only see a few rats running. This made me recoil a bit due to disgust. I was about to go back to my truck when suddenly I saw a silhouette in the distance that caught my attention. I debated for a few seconds whether I should jump the fence. Anyway, I did and walked through the foliage. You could hear that my footsteps were a bit heavy because as I stepped, branches broke and grass was crushed by my shoes. I was still shining my flashlight. The closer I got to that figure, the harder it was to see my truck in the distance. When I got closer, I could see that it was a man, but I couldn't see his face because he was bent over and holding something in his hands. Obviously, I didn't get too close to him because I didn't know what kind of person he was, so I was quite cautious. I wanted to ask him if he was okay, but suddenly I felt something heavy around my feet. For a moment, I thought it was a small, heavy log, but upon looking down, I realized it was a human leg and it was mutilated. But where the hell was the body? The man holding something in his hands turned to look at me for a few milliseconds, and I could see that he was holding an arm covered in bites and blood. That man had blood on his mouth and face. He stared at me like a predator lying in wait. I knew he knew, so I immediately let go of the arm and started chasing me. I ran as fast as I could. I needed to get to the truck and call the police. This man certainly wasn't normal. He wasn't chasing me like a human, he was running like an animal on all fours. Fortunately, I've always been a young man who maintained a good level of physical activity, so I managed to reach the truck before he caught up to me and I was able to lock the doors. I started the truck and drove off as fast as possible. A few minutes after driving frantically, I decided to stop the truck for a moment and call the police, always careful that that thing wasn't behind me. At first, the police didn't believe me, but after seeing my condition, they decided to send a patrol. The surprising thing is that they couldn't find anything. There wasn't even any blood stains. I realized that that thing had eaten everything and left no trace. I never went through that route at night again and never got out of the truck out of mere curiosity. I pray I never have to experience something like that again. Hey, listeners, I hope you enjoyed the previous story. Let's move on to the next one. I had never experienced anything like it before. This story dates back about a year or so. I've been a taxi driver for several years in my city, Guadalajara. Although many don't believe it, there are many places that are said to be haunted or paranormal, like the vampire tree in the Bullen Cemetery and the legend of the dog house, among many other extensive stories to tell. I got into this job out of necessity, due to the pandemic. Before, I worked from home, but when the pandemic ended, I was laid off and had to find another source of income. So, I started looking for job offers related to driving, since I had my driver's license for some time. I kept looking until I found people on the street requesting taxis to transport people after the isolation. I submitted my resume, and in no time, I was called for an interview. Shortly after, I got the job and was able to help my parents, who were sick at the time. Those were tough times. Being a taxi driver can be dangerous due to looting, crime, street insecurity, and many other factors that make Mexico one of the most dangerous countries in Latin America. Despite this, I kept working, taking all sorts of people around the city. Sometimes, my routes went through downtown Guadalajara, other times through Tlaquepaque or the Zapopan area, depending on the distance. I like driving because I can learn about the history of the people who get into my car. Many have interesting stories to tell, which also serves as therapy for them. Besides, I like to hear what happens. It's curious how there are people who, even without saying anything, their way of acting says it all. My regular clients are usually older people who tell stories from the past and legends passed down through generations. Maybe they don't know, but around Guadalajara there are abandoned and supposedly cursed places. Many say they have energy and therefore should not be explored. One day, I was working and had already dropped off several families and individuals at their destinations. The last person I dropped off was near the light rail station in Zapopan, near the Basilica of Zapopan. After receiving payment, I started looking for a good route to get back home. I used my map app to find a route with less traffic and then started the car to begin the journey back home. I live a bit far from the city's most well-known spots, but I'm used to long distances and traffic. All I wanted was to get home to rest and relax a bit. I had been driving for about 20 or 30 minutes when my car started to sputter. That wasn't uncommon, as a few months earlier it had also failed, and I had to take it for repairs. I repeat, in previous years I had never experienced anything strange, so I couldn't imagine what could happen. My grandfather used to say that spirits follow you by the law of attraction. At first, I thought it was nonsense, but suddenly my car stopped. I tried to start the engine, but nothing happened, not even the sound of the engine clicking. I had no choice but to get out of the car to see what was wrong. If the car wouldn't start, I couldn't listen to the radio or connect Bluetooth to listen to music either. I opened the hood to check the engine, but I didn't see anything wrong. The oil had been changed about a month ago, and the brake pads had been replaced just 2 months ago. I couldn't understand what was wrong with the car. I also couldn't illuminate well with my flashlight, as it wasn't very powerful, so it was hard to know what was causing the failures. Suddenly, I began to hear distant wails. It's worth noting that I was on a deserted street, and there was no one around, despite it being 8 p.m. The cries grew louder as I tried to figure out where they were coming from. I saw a woman approaching slowly. She looked pale, almost like a blank sheet, and she was crying. She approached between sobs and wails, and the closer she got, the more I could understand what she was saying. She seemed to be asking for her children. I thought about calling the police, but she kept getting closer, and then I heard her plead for her children with a demonic voice that seemed to come from hell itself. That's when I realized I wasn't facing a woman but a specter, a ghost, an urban legend. I didn't know how to react. I knew La Llorona was from Mexico City or other countries, but I never imagined seeing her in my state. She quickened her pace towards me, and all I did was run as fast as I could, while I could still hear La Llorona's deafening cries chasing me. I stumbled over my own feet near an empty lot where there was an abandoned car, nothing but junk. Without thinking, I jumped in and hid in the trunk, praying that thing wouldn't find me. I spent the next few hours there until I could no longer hear those terrible cries. Since then, I've been cautious of anyone I see on the street while driving, and I remember what my grandfather used to tell me about the law of attraction.